sci-fi and fantasy short stories. Of Risk and Relativity by Lesley Herron. Chapter 9, Peer Pressure. Freezing waters crept up Eric's thighs, causing his breath to hitch in his throat. His captor was shoving him out into the rising sea, the froth and foam coating his clothes as he was guided toward a tall wooden hitching post that rose high above the water. The sight of another man in rags, his own hands tied above his head, quickly enlightened him as to what he was in store for.
"Please, let me speak to someone about this. It's all a big
The reclaimer pulled back their hood, revealing themselves as a dark-skinned elf, and sneered down at the prisoner.
"And what exactly would a corpse have to say?"
The man in rags glanced over.
"Actually, the undead can be quite chatty if given the opportunity."
Eric watched the dusk elf slam a fist into the stranger's side. There was a whimper of pain and a grunt of satisfaction. Then he was quickly strung up as well, followed by Indiga.
"Wait!"
He squirmed against the bindings, struggling to meet the gaze of their captor.
"What about a trial or something? I've got your trial right here."
The reclaimer slammed his fist into the elf's gut with vigor, and then repeated the action a second time.
"That one was for almost killing me."
He pulled away and began retreating to the general warmth of the shore, an icy wave crashing over them all. Indiga stared over at his friend, a tutting noise falling from his lips as he craned his neck to watch their captors abandon them in the chilly waters. Above the rocky coastline was a small shanty-like town. The buildings were all cobbled together from bits of scavenged odds and ends, creating a mismatched community held up by thick poles and concrete pylons. There were rope lines and shaky wooden gangways intermingled with suspension bridges held aloft by aerial balloons. It would have been a fascinating place to visit, had the inhabitants given any of them a moment to explain. One reclaimer remained on the shore, the others zooming away on their motorized bikes. This one, the smallest one, had been their stay of execution the first time, but naturally their luck hadn't held out for a second rescue. By the time they had arrived back in the reclaimer village, their fate had been decided. The little creature was now digging through their share of the loot the group had returned with. Indiga groaned when he noticed their belongings added to the pile was now being torn into. The pint-sized reclaimer held out a small parcel with the victorious war cry. "Not my prawn sandwich! Oh, I was saving that!" Ignoring the throbbing pain in his temple, Eric looked out over the ocean. Rolling gray waves brought in a chilly storm and cast a far-off lighthouse in deeper shadows.
"Well, at least now I have someone to talk to."
The third man had regained his breath and swiveled to address his new friends. He offered them a weak smile.
"It's easier to keep the mind off the cold if you have a distraction. Name's Artemis. How about you guys?"
Wincing at the pain it caused, Eric leaned over to glance at the speaker. He immediately groaned. Of course, there was one here. They were everywhere. Their presence was a universal constant, but some days it felt more like a giant inside joke he wasn't privy to. This man's facial features were distinctly familiar, except this parallel variant was older. Perhaps mid-40s. His hair had begun to recede into a well-defined widow's peak, and his eyes were deeper set. Well, one of them anyway. The other was hidden behind a well-worn leather patch. But he was painfully human, and beneath the mop of wild brown hair, that scruffy jawline was unmistakably Attila's.
"I'm Eric, and that's Indiga."
Artemis nodded solemnly, his body racked with shivers.
"Nice to meet you, if only for just a few minutes. Not sure what y'all did to be sentenced to the drowning pool, but honestly, I'm grateful I don't have to face it alone."
Indiga shot a look at Eric. He tried to shoot one of them with a pistol. Eric scoffed.
It was a warning shot. How was I supposed to know they would react this way?
Was firing a gun at people acceptable where you came from? Several colorful remarks about social commentary immediately filed through his brain, but Eric thought better of it and grumbled,
Fair enough.
There were other, more important things he needed to occupy his mind with, like escaping. The tide was coming in exceedingly fast, and the water was already up past his navel. The cold made it difficult to think, and despite his best efforts, his sluggish mind could only focus on the horrors that lurked beneath the waves and the slow, agonizing death that awaited him.
I've been trying to get out of these all day.
A nervous chuckle fell past Artemis's blue lips as he looked up at his bloody wrists.
If you have any ideas, I'm open to suggestions.
Between the three of us, we have to have some special skill to get out of here.
I had a knife in my pack, but they took all our gear. Indiga tugged at his bonds. I'm not sure I can use my seal form with my hands like this, but I can still hold my breath for about half an hour. Does that help?
How would that help us?
What a stupid idea, Eric thought, but he let the Selkie have a pass. If his mind was struggling in the cold, theirs must be as well. He was still trying to wrap his brain around something when he heard a bark from the shore. He spun, icy waters tickling the bottom of his chest now.
Duck! Oh, he can get us out of here!
The dog was prancing at the water's edge, whining every time the lapping water touched his paws. Eric whistled for the mutt, shouting,
Here, boy!
But the dog only spun in circles, letting out a piteous whine. Don't bother, Indiga sighed. Duck's terrified of getting wet. Of course he is, Eric thought with a sigh. He swiveled back on his bindings, facing the horizon once more. He leaned over to speak to the newest member of their doomed party.
What about you?
Well,
Artemis cocked a half-smile.
I am a necromancer.
Eric's eyebrows shot up.
Wait, really?
Well, I'm trying to be. Unfortunately, it doesn't help us here. It's more of an, after-the-fact benefit.
Oh, the universe was definitely having a grand time. His life, in this moment, was nothing more than a bad joke. A physicist, a necromancer, and a Selkie meet at a bar, or, in this case, tied to one. As the swells splashed his face, he realized that wasn't all he was anymore.
I have an idea.
He closed his eyes and began reaching inside. How had he done this before? That memory was all just a jumbled, chaotic mess. But Eric tried calling up energy, visualizing himself surrounded by crackling red lightning. Nothing happened. He tried his let it flow technique, and once again came up empty. This went on for several minutes.
Mind sharing your plan?
Eric growled at Artemis's interruption.
I need to concentrate.
He tapped into his own well of magic, pulling against his shade, but that only awarded him with a sharp, stinging pain in his chest, the same spot where Wraith had once been.
Not trying to be a bother. I just...
Artemis spluttered as he dipped beneath a wave. The ocean current swept his feet out from beneath him, and his arms were too exhausted to pull himself up. When the surge receded, he pushed his head above the surface and sucked in deep, wet gulps of cold air.
Hang in there.
Eric pulled himself up toward the beam.
Try and get above the water, like this.
Artemis gave him a weak grin before another swell submerged him again.
Help! Anyone!
Eric tried to kick his legs toward the man in an attempt to prop him up, but they were too far apart. A shadow fell over him, and he looked up to see the tiny reclaimer perched on the hitching post, deftly avoiding the occasional spray of water as they dug their long nails into his bindings. Eric's rope snapped free, and the creature grabbed him by the coat. He resisted when he realized he was being guided toward a small raft.
"No!"
He spluttered against another shower of salt water.
"Save them first!"
The figure threw their hands up in the air, letting out a series of indecipherable noises before they set to work on Indiga's bonds. Eric waited until the Selkie was free to shimmy across the pole in order to reach Artemis. But the self-proclaimed necromancer had gone limp, his head entirely submerged. They may have just met, but Eric wouldn't wish that fate on anyone. He grabbed hold of the man with one hand, holding onto the wooden beam with the other, and tried pulling him up, but the shifting current was fighting him. Just as his fingers started to slip, Artemis was pushed back above the surface, coughing and hacking. Eric felt that tickle of exhilaration as he caught sight of a pale seal propping the man up from below. Between the two of them, they managed to keep the necromancer aloft as the reclaimer cut through the final set of bonds. All three of them were waved toward a small raft that, on closer inspection, Eric realized to be the upturned windscreen of a jet with makeshift pontoons on either side. That had implications he would unpack later. For the first time in his life, he didn't care what it was or how it was made, or that it was half full of loot. His only concern now was they needed dry clothes and warmth, or they wouldn't be saved for very long. When a seal flopped out of the water and onto their clear vessel, Eric was distracted from his hard shivers. One of Indiga's hind flippers was missing, and the other was puckered with scar tissue. He took in the unique pattern of pale spots on the seal's ivory fur and realized, with a smile, he had never seen a Selkie in their aquatic form before. How interesting! Artemis wrapped his frozen arms around his own body, shivering hard. He could see a look of relief and satisfaction on the half-elf's face, and he shook his head.
This may not be better than drowning. Ratkin are known for eating people.
Rat?
The seal shuddered, drawing Eric's comment to an end. He turned and watched as Indiga shifted his position, and the animal features of the Selkie's body began to slough off him like a soggy sweater. The man adjusted his seal skin on his body, wearing it like a layer of clothing, presumably because he lost his to the ocean in the transformation.
Saved for the moment is still saved. Don't toss a fish back just because it jumped into your boat.
Indiga folded his arms around himself, shuddering once more. Eric blinked several times at that odd turn of phrase, but shrugged it off. He looked over at their tiny savior.
Hey, are you going to eat us?
He really hoped the answer would be no. Instead, all he got was a single word.
Shaman!
Before the ratkin deftly jumped to the front of the boat and began dragging their hands through the water, propelling them further into the rolling waves. Shuddering against the cold, Indiga tugged at the edges of his sealskin.
Think that means the shaman will eat us?
With a groan, Artemis closed his eyes.
Honestly, right now, I'd prefer to be cooked to freezing to death, so I'm willing to take a gamble.
That didn't fill him with any amount of confidence, and Eric turned his attention from the oceanic structure, presumably their destination, back to the shore. Duck was still prancing around at the water's edge.
Hey, will your dog be okay out here alone?
Indiga laughed.
You try getting a dire husky to do something it didn't want to do. He'll be fine. You look terrible.
Lucas glanced up as Atlas strode toward him. He didn't need the Arcanist to confirm this. He knew what he must look like. After the initial terror of the sleep mask had worn off, he found ways to manipulate what he was shown in order to avoid Vel. And it worked. He was able to spend the nights lounging in the greenhouse and listening to his father, instead of sleeping. He decided that it wasn't important enough to share with the Arcanist, and Lucas waved the man off.
Yeah, I'm fine. Just adapting to my new work schedule.
You shouldn't be adapting to anything.
Atlas pinched the bridge of his nose, groaning to himself as he hobbled up next to the Dryad.
We're supposed to be finding a way to get out of our contracts.
Oh! Lucas's eyebrows lifted.
And how's that been going?
He shifted his golden eyes from the Arcanist to the warrior Dryad. When neither one of them had anything to say, a smile wormed its way across his face.
I thought so.
Undine scowled as she tugged at the sleeves of her ridiculous uniform. It was too short for her long arms.
I have tried every door, window, and trash chute.
She lowered her voice as the three of them made their way down the hall toward the gap in the floor and the manager's office.
I even attempted to run after depositing luggage in a vehicle. I rounded the corner and pop!
She flexed her fingers open.
I was back in the lobby.
Look, I told ya.
Atlas rolled his one eye.
Our contracts are binding. As in, they bind us to the spot. We can't leave until we've served our 8 years apiece, or someone above us signs off on the contract.
He attempted to jump the gap, but the toes of his cast dipped into the darkness, threatening to pull the rest of him in. Thankfully, the two Dryads had a firm grip on his arm, and they hoisted him up. Why nobody had bothered to repair that yet was beyond him. It was just a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Let's just see what Miranda wants, and we'll come up with a plan later.
Lucas raised an eyebrow as he watched the Arcanist undo the top 3 buttons of his hotel uniform.
Any reason you're showing off your peach fuzz?
Atlas scoffed.
Ladies love a smooth chest.
You will if Miranda catches you not following dress code. She's likely to nail you to a wall.
I'd let her nail me wherever she fancies. Wall, bed, balcony.
He met each of their gazes, wiggling his eyebrows, then frowned.
Wait, where's our robot?
Oh, I haven't seen him.
Lucas squinted down the long hall, but the three of them were alone.
Maybe he's already been here.
In truth, he hadn't seen the robot since they arrived, but he chalked that up to their jobs keeping them in separate areas of the hotel. He shrugged and let his knuckles fall against the door.
Come in.
Miranda pressed her fingers against her temple, rubbing away the building migraine as 3 of her newest group of volunteers crept into her room. All 3 of them were terrified of her. Well, 2 were. The third was licking his lips hungrily in her direction. She wrinkled her nose and waved to the seats in front of her desk.
Well, I haven't got all day. Please.
In a rush to comply, Atlas was the first to drop into a chair. He leaned heavily against the desk, giving the manager a good look at his exposed chest as he made an act of digging for his time card. He set it down and slid it across to her, that smile never leaving his face. Lucas placed his card on the desk, while Undine, who didn't take a seat, tossed a crumpled wad of paper onto the pile. Even though her face was hidden behind a veil, Miranda still offered the female Dryad a dark look as she flattened out the scrunched-up card. She sighed as she reached over and pulled a pen from the holder and licked the end of it.
I need you 3 to deal with a problem.
She scribbled a quick signature on each before whisking the cards back to their owners.
Your robotic companion has failed to check in with me in the last 7 days.
She leaned against her wing-back chair, folding her arms over her chest.
Head down to the boiler room and find out what it's been up to. Why do you need us to check in on him?
Lucas took his card and handed the others theirs.
Because he's your machine. And since you share a combined sentence, it might behoove you to encourage him to actually get credit for serving it.
Miranda stood, flicking her fingers at the door.
Now go, before lower management hears of this.
When they moved to leave, she pointed to the female Dryad.
Wait, you, hold up.
Undine sucked in a long, angry breath through her nose before turning back around.
Yes?
There was a barely stifled snarl in the word.
Your co-workers have informed me that you have been slacking in your responsibilities.
Miranda looked down at her glossy red nails.
Care to explain yourself?
Slacking in responsibilities?
Undine straightened.
I am a warrior of the enshrined wilds, and even though I despise this uniform,
she gestured at it with a hand,
I have done only what I am told to do.
Quite. Additionally, I have received numerous complaints about your, and I quote, gaze that could freeze the pits of hell.
Undine's lips quirked up slightly, but she tamped it back down.
You do not pay me to be friendly.
Technically, we don't pay you at all. Remember, a little initiative goes a long way.
I shall remember. A little initiative next time one of those airy apes complains about me.
Undine sniffed haughtily, drawing her chin up in a defiant expression.
I'll initiative them right down the flight of stairs.
Miranda didn't fight the laugh that fell past her ruby lips. A few of her snakes bobbed their heads in delight.
We'll squash that disobedience from you yet. Now, please, tend to your machine.
Before Atlas could make his move, a dashing smile and a wider peek at his freckled chest, he and the two dryads found themselves transported outside of her office, the door slamming neatly shut in their faces. He threw his head back, wailing in frustration. He was so close that time.
Come on.
Lucas gestured to the other end of the hall.
I want to get this over with so I can go to bed.
He was exhausted. But that wasn't the truth. He was just eager to spend some time with his dad once more. But they didn't need to know that. The trip to the boiler room led them down twisting hallways, through confusing mazes of dining halls and rec rooms, and, much to Atlas's delight, the sauna. He wanted to stop, but the others insisted on continuing.
Are you sure we have to?
Atlas had somehow ended up in the lap of a large, pale woman with sparkling white hair. She tittered as she ran a finger across his exposed chest, and the chilly line of frost it left made his knees quiver. Lucas, grumbling to himself, grabbed the Arcanist by the ear and dragged him away from the several women that had begun to crowd around the man. "No! Come on!"
"Aw, you're no fun."
Atlas wrenched himself free and straightened up his shirt.
"You know, I'm sure you could find yourself a suitable someone here to help you loosen up."
Perhaps his heart was still raw from seeing Vel in the first memory, or maybe it was his lack of sleep fraying his nerves. But whatever it was, Lucas had to resist the urge to slap the Arcanist. Tears burned in his eyes as he pointed to the end of the room.
"The boilers are right through those doors. Help us get that damned robot sorted out first, and then you can go frolic around."
Atlas rolled his one eye again and moved for the door labeled Boilers. Heat and steam blasted him in the face as he pulled it open, along with the taste of salt. Shielding his face from the blistering steam, he blinked several times and stepped inside.
"Hello?"
Are you sure we did not loop back around to the saunas?"
Undine tugged at the neck of her uniform, fighting its constriction.
"I think my clothes are shrinking from the heat."
There was nothing to see, save for a large white sheet hung in front of the door, blocking out the remainder of the room. As Lucas slid it aside, he had to do a double take. The boiler room was massive, filled with a rat's nest of pipes, furnaces, and giant wooden crates full of coal. And hanging off just about every surface were spare bed linens, the hotel logo stamped in the middle. The boilers were running at full speed, dulling his senses with the roar of the flame and the heady scent of fire and soot. The floor was slick with moisture, and the steam had created a thick fog that obscured their vision.
"Hang on, I see something."
Atlas navigated the crowded room of ghosts until he pulled one final sheet aside to reveal a structure crafted from empty, broken-down coal crates. They had been haphazardly tethered together with strips of cloth. In the steam of the room, and with the billowing linens, the odd structure resembled a ship. Standing near the mast, which was crafted from an unused laundry basket and several mops lashed together, was their robotic companion. Streaks of green copper patina and rust were running from every joint. The machine had even artfully folded a bath towel on its head into a tricorn hat. When the robot swiveled around to inspect the cause of the commotion, Atlas almost barked a laugh at the eye patch situated over its left eye.
"Stealing my look now, are ya?"
"Ahoy! What be this then? A rival crew come to snatch me doubloons?"
Releasing his grip on the mast, Unit 2 moved towards the newcomers. He squinted at each of them in turn, and a flash of recognition lit up his one good eye as he caught sight of a familiar face.
"Aha! It be Commodore Atticus."
"How many times must I say this? It's pronounced Atlas."
"Ah."
Unit 2 leaned back, drawing two small fingers down along his beardless metal chin.
"We be using code names, is it?"
He drew his cutlass, which was actually just a plunger, and aimed it at the ceiling.
"Well, then you may address me as Captain Bram."
What was that old saying? If you hear hooves, think horses, not zebras? Eric shook his head as what he thought to be a lighthouse was actually a half-submerged cruise ship. The back end of the gigantic ocean liner was sticking straight out of the water, several hundred feet into the sky. Giant metal beams rose from the depths as well, leaning against the structure from all sides to prevent further collapse. Their guide docked their vessel against a small shelf built into the hull of the ship. The three of them were quickly put to work, hefting the bags of stuff the little creature had brought with them. It wasn't easy, being a trio of crippled, hobbled, and half-drowned men, but if they slowed even for a moment, the short reclaimer would prod them with its sharp claws. Eric hardly had any time to admire the odd nature of the ship. Being on its end meant the current floors and ceilings had once been walls, and they were climbing through horizontal doorways and up rope ladders towards the back, now top, of the ship. They clambered through ports and repurposed water slides, wobbled over rope nets stretched across hallways, or stumbled down makeshift stairs. The entire journey was made all the more perilous by the constant dimming and brightening of the electric lights. He figured it was some form of submerged hydro generator that used the current to create the intermittent power. If he hadn't been so numb from cold, or so worried they were still on the menu, Eric might have enjoyed himself. But the constant appearance of these rat-like people kept the latter on his mind. They came in many different shapes, sizes, and fur colors. Some were small, like their guide, and others were taller than he was. The three of them were sniffed at almost as much as they were poked and prodded, but every time someone came too close, the short reclaimer would bark something at them and send the intruders scurrying back. Eventually, they entered a common room of sorts, what was once a theater by the looks of it. Many of the Ratkin had gathered in this room, huddling around a large heater erected in the center. Their watery black eyes followed them. Eric wasn't sure if that was curiosity he saw or hunger. Their guide instructed them, by repeated hand gestures, to set down all the goods before they began barking at the others. More had piled in now, using the raised floor to gain a better view of the newcomers. However, the onlookers didn't wait for further explanation before they swarmed. Eric clenched his eyes shut, cringing in on himself, and waited for the inevitable pain of sharp incisors sinking into his flesh. But as the rustling continued around him, his body remained unharmed, and he peeked open an eye. The Ratkin were divvying up the goods in a fair and impartial manner. They didn't bicker or hoard greedily. Instead, they showed and shared what was removed, handing off important items to those most in need. Eric noticed that his two companions had the right idea, having shuffled closer to the heater. He had just made to move there as well, when a voice, in a language he understood, spoke over the organized commotion.
"Yikrip, you have brought men. Are they food or friend?"
The three of them exchanged wary looks with one another before Artemis raised a shaking hand.
I'd like to be a friend, if that's an option.
Eric spun on the voice to see a tall, thin figure draped in long black and white robes, each sleeve decorated with countless stars and glittering gems. They had a long, pure white beard that stretched down to the ground, and a mustache as equally glorious. Their hands were tucked behind their back as they stooped to look down a long snout at him.
Shaman!
Jumping in surprise, Eric looked down as Yikrip, the short reclaimer, had grabbed his hand and tugged him forward. Offering him up for sacrifice? He belted out a nervous laugh.
You don't want to eat us. We're quite filthy and probably don't taste good."
The tall figure chuckled.
"Forgive an old soul their little jokes. We don't actually eat people."
He turned to Yikrip.
"Did you bring an offering?"
The excited creature bounded back to the pile, digging through what was left, until they pulled a shiny bauble from one of the bags. Eric took the shining object as it was offered to him, and he lifted it to his face. In the dim glow of the scant buzzing lights, he could see he was holding a multifaceted shard of glass. A light catcher, like the ones his mother had hung in the kitchen window back home. His attention was pulled from the bauble when the shaman leaned in closer, invading his personal space. The ancient ratkin nodded.
"You are seekers, then?"
Unable to form words from his dry mouth, Eric settled on a nod.
"Very well."
The shaman sniffed at the half-elf.
"Come on. I am an old rat, and I do not care to have my time wasted."
He straightened his back and began shuffling from the room. Reluctant to leave the warmth of the heaters, Eric gave a glance to the other two before he followed slowly. The shaman led them into countless more rooms, up a rickety set of slipshod stairs, and through the public baths, an awkward walk for the three of them as it was absolutely packed. He finally came to a stop when he led them into what was once the ship's chapel. On the western wall, that had previously been the ceiling, was a massive stained glass mural. It depicted an image of a bird, specifically a magpie. Its wings were spread wide over a bright sun, the rays divided into a kaleidoscope of colors. The light from the setting sun, peeking in through the heavy clouds on the horizon, filtered into the room, the bright shafts splitting apart on the thousands of crystal light catchers that hung all around them. Eric couldn't recall the last time something so simple had left him so speechless. The bright spots of light danced across the room, diminishing against the small fire pit that sat in the middle of the space. Its flames were caged off, but surrounding it were more drops of color in the form of clear glass. It was warm, and it filled him with wonder. The shaman, busy moving around the room, stooped to open a door in the floor. He shuffled down into it and began flinging out clothing. He paused at one article, dragging his long fingers through his beard and mustache as he pondered the functionality of something so puffy. He shrugged and tossed it out, too. After a minute or two of this, he grabbed several thick towels and climbed back out, handing them to each of his three new guests.
"My name is Root, and I am well aware of why you are here."
A thin smile curled his features.
"But you cannot address the great Rumus looking like half-drowned monkeys."
Taking the towel, Eric ran it over his head, scrubbing at his scalp for a moment, before he pulled it down and scanned the room, squinting with his near-blind eyes.
"Who?"
Root sighed and gestured to the large mural. Eric followed the shaman's movements to the stained glass window.
Oh, right, the god.
The rat gestured to the piles of clothes, and he exchanged a look with the Selkie and necromancer. The two of them had followed him into the room, unaware of what awaited, but appeared to be content sitting near the fire pit.
The clothes are for you as well. It would be rude of me to let you die of hypothermia.
As they rifled through the clothing, trying anything and everything on, Rurt shuffled around the chapel, digging through boxes and opening drawers. He moved to the flame, lighting several sticks of incense before he placed them on the altar in front of the mural. Thin lines of smoke began to curl up and around the baubles of light. Flannel wasn't exactly his style, but Eric was pleased to be wearing something warm, and more importantly, dry. He glanced over at the others and bit back on a laugh. Indiga had cobbled together a mishmash of clothes consisting of women's yoga pants, an extra-long down jacket, and an olive-green turtleneck sweater. Artemis, however, had chosen something fancy and frilly. Black slacks and coat with an olive vest and cravat. Though the outfit didn't fit him properly, it was a size too big. Saddling back up to the fire, Artemis stuck out his hands and closed his eyes. Thank you for the change of clothes, and the warmth, and for, well, he grinned, not eating us. Barking a laugh, Rurt waved him off.
The humans of Firthwell may hate us, and judging by how they wanted to drown you in the fury of the ocean, they feel the same towards you lot. But we are actually quite peaceful.
He moved in front of the altar, fanning the smoke from the incense into the air.
And we do not eat the intelligent races.
He smiled before adding,
Rumus has already spoken with me about your visit. That is why I sent Yikrip to bring you to me.
Eric didn't much take to the idea that he was at the whim of the gods. But it was better than drowning, or being eaten. Maybe. The shaman pulled something from the depths of his robes and moved through the smoke. It swirled around him, bending the curls with the light until it resembled a dense fog. Rurt offered up a single string of silver to the half-elf.
Please, place your offering to Rumus wherever your heart tells you it should go.
Blinking in confusion, Eric took the string and looked down at the bauble. A chuckle escaped him. Where his heart told him? He scoffed before looking for the nearest available space. But no matter where he glanced, he was being drawn to a spot that would make it look like the stained glass magpie was holding it in its beak. As he threaded the orb onto the line and raised it into place, light began dancing around the room in an array of patterns he hadn't noticed before. Eric watched as the glittering rainbows began to refract within the growing cloud of incense smoke. And as they shifted and spun, they came together, creating the form of a giant bird. The shaman reached up and with a great intake of air, breathed in the god of smoke and light. Eric stumbled back when Rurt turned on him, his watery black eyes now an impossible yellow, and he spoke with a voice much deeper and commanding than was possible for such a frail form.
Chronomancer, Kedayani told me you would be coming. Welcome.
Chronomancer? Artemis lifted his head curiously. As in time travel?
Are you going to threaten me as well? She wasn't exactly understanding of my situation.
Eric leaned away from the ancient rat as his personal space was once again invaded.
That remains to be seen.
Rurt, or rather Rumus, lifted a hand and placed it against the half-elf's chest, searching for something.
Not all of us feel as Kedayani does. It is the underlying dangers of time travel that she fears, and many would say rightfully so.
Why?
Artemis spoke, moving away from the fire as he did.
Because we could bring back the dead?
Interesting point. Eric had to remind himself that the man was a necromancer after all, in order to keep his eyebrows where they belonged.
Hardly.
Rumus clicked his tongue in a very bird-like fashion.
Why would we care if mortals live or die? You are but sparks from a bonfire, mundane and short. No, if all time travel did was alter the past, we would not care in the least.
Uncomfortable with the hand still against his chest, Eric tried to shy away from it, but couldn't. Okay, so why do you care so much then? Rumus used his borrowed hands to pull at the gentle tendrils of smoke pluming from the fire pit, as well as the incense. They twirled around his fingers as he waved them into the air, forming two separate horizontal lines, one red, one blue.
When the past is changed, a new timeline is created. But two times cannot exist in parallel. The new path wants to overwrite the old, erase it entirely. But remnants remain, bits of time that refuse to be extinguished.
The red line coiled around the blue, snuffing all but a few wisps that circled like little whirlpools.
In small amounts, these remnants are harmless, but the more they occur...
He tapped the line in several spots, leaving new swirls of blue tugging at the red.
The more they disrupt the integrity of time, ripples in a pond.
The opposing swirls tore the line apart, and the entire image dissipated, leaving only after-images of purple behind. So, you're afraid I will change something so much that I, destroy time? Eric swallowed hard at the thought, but a plan was already forming in his mind.
It happened once before, and all those practitioners were destroyed, along with countless worlds and their gods.
Eric wanted to laugh. Well, no problem then. I don't even know how I did it.
Somehow...
Rumus plucked up the half-elf's hands, holding up his blackened fingers.
You've managed to spread yourself throughout time. Your ability to travel through it is nothing more than a byproduct of your body trying to reunite with its missing pieces. Not that it ever can, at least not fully. But the reason you can't travel at will is due to a more immediate problem. Your shade is torn.
He let the elf go, a smile curling his features.
I can fix that for you.
Wait, why would... The ancient hand shot out once more, pressing hard against Eric's chest, and he could feel something seeping into his body. A presence sharp and jagged filled the tiny gap in his shade, the spot where Wraith once sat. And before he could even question the god's reasoning, something pulled at his gut, and the familiar tingle of magic rushed towards his fingers. Red lightning overtook his vision, and he began falling through a void of blackness. Judge Kregma stretched her neck to one side, eliciting a loud pop. She grunted in satisfaction and blinked the tired from her eyes, looking back down at the never-ending stack of forms she had been signing. Well, stamping. 200 years of legal documentation had utterly destroyed her wrists. But her heart wasn't in it today. She normally reveled in the bureaucracy, but even she had her limits. She leaned back in her chair, deciding on lunch, when her chamber doors burst open and a young woman with long, blonde curls pranced inside. Her gaze shifted over to the clock on the wall, and Kregma frowned. She wasn't supposed to have another case for 2 more hours. Well, it wasn't like this would be the first time someone showed up unannounced. She closed the many folders and leaned over her bench.
What can I do for you, Miss...
Ruby, all smiles and rosy cheeks, paused her prancing to grab handfuls of her tattered skirts and curtsied so sweetly it almost made her sick. The judge, appreciative of the gesture, waved her down and she dropped the fabric. No longer skipping, she strode up to the podium, a smile curling her lips.
Do you have a case number?
Kregma glanced down at the documents across her bench, stroking her beard as she did. She'd just had it braided. Ruby stood on the balls of her feet, propping herself up on the desk. She beckoned the judge closer with a wag of her finger and a smile. Kregma pulled her eyes away from the paperwork and leaned in. Her curiosity turned into a scream when the blonde woman grabbed her by the braids beneath her chin and wrenched her down, plastering her face to the desk. She cried out, her nose smushed against her files, smearing the fresh ink.
Hark! Ah! Nest!
Ruby forced the word from her throat, each syllable bringing her untold pain.
Where?
You've been listening to Of Risk and Relativity by Lesley Herron, Book 5 in the series here on Tall Tale TV. If you would like to listen to the entire book in one place, or any of her other novels, you can find them at talltaletv.com/series, or by following the links in the description.
Okay, and you are all checked in for a 3-night stay. Oh, my. That's a lot of luggage you have there. Just allow me to get several bellhops to carry it for you.
Oh, that's mighty kind of you.
Of course, our pleasure.
Is everything all right?
Yes, of course. It's just 1 second.
If you ring that bell again, I will wring your neck.
Oh, my, that's...
Undine, would you mind escorting our guest to their suite?
Can't you see I'm busy? Call one of those hairy apes to do it.
I would, but they all seem to be absent, and you're just going in and out the door. So if you could just...
Nonsense! I see one of them behind that pillar. Oi, monkey boy, get over here.
Technically, they're Sasquatch.
Technically, I don't care.
If it's easier, I could just...
I see you hiding. Don't make me drag you out. What did you say to me?
Oh, dear.
Listen, you giant-footed teddy bear. I will skin you and make a stinky rug. I don't care.
No, that's okay. I can just get them myself. It's only 47 floors. I could use the exercise.
Are you sure?
Aye, very sure.
See? You didn't need me anyway. I am going back to what I was doing. I heard that.